I want to acknowledge our university and community supporters, the University of Iowa's international programs, the University of Iowa's honors program, the University of Iowa Center for Public Policy, and the Stanley U of I Foundation Support Organization for their financial support. And I also want to thank today's special sponsors, Midwest One Bank, Alan Swanson, who's here with us, Blank and McCune Realtors, and Alice and Ken Atkinson. I also thank City Channel 4 for professionally recording our programs for broadcast on City Channel 4 or 118-2 and the U of I Library's digital archives. Over 250 ICFRC podcasts can now be found on iTunes, so I encourage you, if you miss a program, you can still hear them. So, at this time, though, it is my pleasure to introduce Karen Walksmith, who will introduce today's speakers. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'll be introducing our speakers with a short bio before each of them comes up to the podium, but we're going to start now. I'd like to share some great new developments in the Fulbright program at the University of Iowa. The University of Iowa was named a top producer of U.S. Fulbright students for the 4th consecutive year this past February. Thank you. As you can see, these are our peer top-producing institutions, and we're pretty pleased to be in this company. We're right in the middle there. And this year was a real watershed year for the Fulbright program in international programs, and we had 47 applicants, our largest number of applicants ever. Out of that, in the second stage, we had 32 semifinalists, which means roughly 68% of our applicants made it to the second round to be reviewed overseas. And out of that, at this point, we have 17 winners, which is the largest number we've ever had. That means 17 young people going over for an academic year to either teach or study abroad, as many of you already know. We still have 4 alternates out there who could be promoted. Just a breakdown of this year's competition briefly. You'll see that we have twice as many undergraduates as graduates who apply, so that's very exciting for us. We had a large number of arts applications this year. And also, I know you can't see possibly all of these countries, but people applied to 27 different countries, so that shows a real wide breadth of interest among our applicants. Also, Fulbrighters come from many different fields. As you can see, our faculty committee comes together, a group of people from all disciplines to interview these students, and they are generalists who do a wonderful job. Professor Reisinger is on our committee and one of our mentors, and is in the audience today. And lastly, as you can see, this is this year's Fulbright poster, and tells all of the fields of our winners with 7 English teaching assistantships and 4 creative arts winners, and then also people in the sciences, people in paper making, people in translation. So today we're going to start with our 2 undergraduate awardees for this year, and Alex Baer will be our first. He will graduate in May 2019 with a BA in International Relations and Spanish, along with a minor in Arabic. He's originally from the near the Quad Cities. He studied abroad in Cochabamba, Bolivia in fall 2018, and he went on to become the Outreach Director of Spectrum UI and Director of Justice and Equity in the Executive Cabinet of the University of Iowa Student Government. He is very excited to embark on what he hopes to be the start of a long career in Colombia as an English teaching assistant.
Hi, everyone. So happy to be here speaking with you about my feature assignment in the Republic of Colombia. Colombia is a country that I have been acquainted with ever since I came to university and met people from Colombia who were on this campus who are also studying. And they really inspired me to think more about what is often written off as a violent and a country struggling to recover from years of civil war in association with the drug trade. And so that actually pushed me to apply and look into studying abroad there, which the study abroad office declined due to security concerns at the time, which is how I ended up in Bolivia. But here I am getting ready to go to Colombia, finally on a Fulbright scholarship. So as Karen said, I have a couple other study abroad experiences as well, and was a critical language scholar in Oman last summer, and then this summer was awarded from Morocco, but had to turn it down due to date conflict with the Fulbright scholarship. I'll start off with talking a little bit about Barranquilla, which is where I was assigned in Colombia specifically, and I got my assignment just in the last couple of weeks. So I've been frantically reaching out to friends who live there and trying to learn as much as I can about the city and my university. With Fulbright Colombia, this map is actually old. This is 3 years back. Since then, they've expanded their program even to regions that are outside of the Cordillera mountain range and also the coastal regions. And they now have positions in more remote parts of the Amazon, which is basically half of that country that you see doesn't have any positions marked. And they now have 80 positions available for the English teaching assistant program. So I got assigned to Barranquilla, which is the very top of that map. And there it is circled. Barranquilla is generally considered to be the capital of the Caribbean region of Colombia and is the fourth largest city. It's also where a lot of Colombian Americans come from, surprisingly. So Shakira is from Barranquilla. She's not Colombian American, but very well known. And Sofia Vergara, a famous actor, also comes from Barranquilla originally. The city is about 1,200,000, comparable to the size of the Dallas area, and has gone under a lot of development over the last few decades, but primarily remains an industrial city. So if you travel to Colombia, chances are your itinerary will not include Barranquilla due to the more touristic regions in the Caribbean, such as Cartagena and Santa Marta, which is where Tayrona National Park is. And I was specifically assigned to Universidad del Norte, or Uninorte, which is the largest and also the top-ranked university for the Caribbean region of Colombia. It's a private institution, which in Latin America, private versus public institutions are completely different animals in a lot of ways. And so it has a lot more of an American model of education, and also a lot of focus in international relations, which is my undergraduate major. So what am I going to be doing in Colombia, and why Colombia? So when I say Colombia, this is the image a lot of people who are not familiar with the country themselves have in their mind. And unfortunately, it's the image that the media continues to put out of Colombia, and that television shows continue to put out of Colombia to this day. And while, yes, there are still residual issues from Colombia's 50-year civil war, Colombia has also changed a lot since 1992, when Pablo Escobar was in the front pages of newspapers across the world, and when drugs became synonymous with Colombia itself. So in my proposal for the Fulbright ETA, I was given a chance to explain one social or community engagement project that I would undertake while I was an ETA embedded in a Colombian university. And so I thought about it a long time, racked my brain, and I think I changed several times, as Karen can attest. But I ultimately settled on going with a proposal that would involve working with students who are interested in telling stories and using their English skills to share news and share stories from their communities with international and national media publications, print publications in the English language, which Colombia actually does have 3 English newspapers that provide an excellent chance for students to publish their work and also get that not just out in Colombia, but picked up by larger media companies around the world. And so I personally had worked with a media organization called City Post Bogota, which is the largest English language newspaper in the country. And they also expressed interest in having student work workshopped on my end and then submitted for publication. And so that was what I proposed. Of course, if any of you are familiar with people who go on Fulbrights, these proposals almost always change and never end up working out due to logistical concerns and the realities of the university that you're placed in. So I'm still very hopeful that this is something that will work out, and it's something that I'm personally very interested in as someone who looks at international relations with a political science lens because of my undergraduate work. But I did want to also give a little bit of insight into what Colombia does look like today. So this map is a reflection of the State Department's current travel advisory for the country, which ranges from everywhere from level 2, which is just fairly normal precautions, all the way to level 4, do not travel. And the State Department has a tendency to scare people. So they used to issue a blanket advisory for the whole country and gave it a travel warning distinction, which scared people for a long time until last year when they changed their warning system and now do it by department. So my department is the very small one up at the very northwestern edge of the map up there. But as you can see, there are other parts of the country where the residual effects of the conflict continue to affect people's daily lives, particularly the Pacific coast and parts of what are the Amazon and also the Orinoco River Valley and plains surrounding that region along the border with Venezuela. So while in 2016, the peace agreement was signed between the FARC, which are the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, who have been waging a war for about 50 years with the central government, there are still residual bands, what they're referred to as, and also the ELN or ELENOS, who are the National Liberation Army, another leftist guerrilla group that has not yet signed a peace agreement, but is very close, I believe. They were very close the last few months to having a peace agreement signed with the government, but it fell through. And ultimately, as we heard in the news, there was a bombing in Bogota recently. That was the first of that scale in a couple of decades. So while those things still do happen, it's at a much less scale than it used to happen. And I will also add that all the cities in Colombia have murder rates that are now lower than both Baltimore and St. Louis. So lastly, there's my article that I published in Colombia's English language newspaper a year ago or so. I was in Colombia and met Venezuelan migrants by chance and ended up writing a story about their experience on Colombia's streets. And then that is what led me to my current project. But I know since you're going to ask, I put my future plans so you can read this and then ask me in more depth afterwards if it interests you. But thank you so very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Alex. And now a face that many of you have seen before multiple times here as an intern, Jeffrey Clark. He was born to a Korean mother and an American father. He did not speak Korean growing up, but he traveled to South Korea from 2017 through 2018 through University of Iowa Study Abroad program, where he studied Korean history and language at Ewha Women's University. He will go to South Korea to fulfill his Fulbright service as an English teaching assistant. He's currently planning on a career in the United States Foreign Service. Welcome, Jeffrey Clark.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jeffrey Clark. It's a real honor to be up here, especially because, like Karen mentioned, I've been an intern for multiple years at the ICFRC. Some of you might recognize me. I definitely recognize some faces in the audience. Before I begin, I'd like to thank my friends for coming and giving me so much support throughout the Fulbright process. She's leaving right now. One of my friends is leaving right now. Thank you, Jenna. Of course, I'd like to thank Ed Sastro, the executive director of the ICFRC, for not only recommending me for a Fulbright to Karen, but also giving me so much support through the process, giving me advice for the interview, helping me connect with people who applied for Fulbrights in the past, and just being, in general, a really great boss and a really great friend. Thank you so much, Ed. I'd also like to thank Karen Walksmith for all her assistance through the process. It was really important. Karen knows that I can be disorganized sometimes. So it was really important for me sometimes to get a kick in the right direction, because I definitely needed it. So thank you, Karen, as well. And of course, thank you to all the ICFRC interns and friends that I have here. Okay. So Karen already introduced me a little bit, but I was originally, oh, sorry, there it is. Okay. My first introduction to the ICFRC was about 2 years ago as a sophomore. I came with a friend, and this first speaker that I ever listened to was Ambassador Ron McMullen. He gave a very interesting speech on uprooting opium in Afghanistan. So that was a really interesting speech to first listen to. And I think even starting from the beginning, I found a real connection to the ICFRC because unlike being in a classroom, I found that I could have a personal connection with the speakers. I could ask questions right afterwards, which, we're going to have a section for that afterwards, after this as well. It felt like a very direct and really unique way to communicate information about international issues that are not just important across the world, but are very important to people in Iowa and across the entire United States. Okay. So I actually have not received an assignment to a particular place or university in Korea. So my approach is going to be a little bit more personal, more my personal background. So like Karen mentioned, my father is American, my mother is Korean. My father was born in Philadelphia, my mother was born in Seoul, the capital of South Korea. So I grew up with a lot of both influences from both cultures. So this is actually a picture my mom dug up recently. So this is called the 100-Day Celebration. The 100-Day Celebration was important in traditional Korean culture because a long time ago, and this is true across many places, but in Korea this is especially important, it was rare for children to reach the age of 100. It was much rare. So the celebration for reaching 100 was a much bigger event. It was a much bigger deal. In Korean, it's 백일 잔치. So this is me celebrating with my family at exactly 100 years old, or 100 years old, at exactly 100 days old. I'm a little bit nervous. So my father's cutting an American-style cake, and in front of my mother is Korean rice cake. There's bananas there, apples, and there's yakwa. Yakwa is a traditional Korean-style honey cake, which is very delicious. So if you ever get a chance to try it, I would recommend it. Oh, and on the left side is, or on your right side is my grandparents and my mother's side of the family. So while I grew up celebrating these kinds of events with my family, I didn't learn Korean growing up, and I didn't understand it either. Like, there are many Korean Americans who they can understand Korean even if they can't speak it back to their parents. I think this is true of many second generation children in the US. But I don't have the same background that other Korean Americans do. So, but in recent years, especially in the end of my sophomore year, I became very interested in learning more about Korean culture, my mother's culture, and in practicing the language, especially. That's what I became most interested in. So those are a picture of my parents when they're younger. My mother when she was a baby, and my father when he was about to go to college. So I decided to go to Ewha Women's University. And it's a little bit strange because when I was thinking about where to go in Korea for study abroad, I considered going to Yonsei University, which is another university in Seoul. Ewha Women's University is also in Seoul. But that didn't work out, so I ended up applying to Ewha Women's University. I was told by my advisor that yes, it is okay for men to go to Ewha Women's University. It's okay, male exchange students are allowed there, but that is a question that I got a lot in Korea as to how I was going to Ewha Women's University and like why I decided to go there. But it was a very unique experience. There were something I was nervous about before I left was how many male exchange students there would be, but there were a decent amount, and I made many friends, Korean domestic students and exchange students as well. So I studied abroad there during my academic year 2017 to 2018, my junior year. I focused mostly on language training, but I also took classes in Korean history and Korean culture. And I got a much better understanding, not only by talking to people on the street and in the classroom, but also by learning from professors and speaking to other people about what it means to be Korean and the importance of Korean culture and the changing Korean culture, especially in our globalizing world. Okay, so this is a picture of me in my first semester when I was learning Korean. So these are a couple of my friends and my teacher, my 선생님. So I think I tried to bite off more than I could chew at the beginning, especially. So I joined a Korean level class that was much higher than I probably should have joined, and at the start, I was definitely the bottom of the class, but by the end, I'd learned so much. I'd made a lot of friends in that class, and I feel like even though it was a really difficult experience, it was one that really changed me and really added to not only my understanding of the world, but also my understanding of my own culture as well. So some of the lessons that I learned is that everyone has the ability to learn a new language. It doesn't matter where you come from or how old you are. But one of the most difficult things is anyone who's speaking a second or third language knows this to anyone else. If you're in a public situation where you have to speak to a lot of people or people you don't know, it's very, very, very scary to have to speak in another language. You're worried about your accent. You're worried about not getting things right culturally. And this is something that I was worried about all the time in Korea. So I actually had the opportunity in my second semester in Korea to do an internship called EPALS. EPALS stands for English Pals, where I volunteered to speak English, be an English conversation partner with Korean students, and also be an interview partner. So if they were practicing for a job interview, because English is very important to getting a job in Korea, as it is in many places in the world, I would be that partner for them. But what I learned quickly is that many Korean students, especially this university, Ewha Women's University, were very good at English. But the thing they were most worried about is, speaking with American especially, is messing up the same things I worried about. Messing up the language, messing up cultural issues, not understanding things 100%, not being able to understand every single word that comes at them. Those are the things they were the most worried about. So I realized quickly that I really had to focus on making them feel more comfortable. And that way, if they felt comfortable, then we could have a conversation and we would both benefit from that. So my Fulbright to Korea, I already mentioned before that I don't know exactly where I'll be going in Korea. A student last year from the University of Iowa actually went to Jeju-do, which is an island right off the south coast of Korea. And that island is actually very interesting. Just a little aside, that island's very interesting because they're so separated from the mainland, literally physically separated from the mainland, they don't just have an accent that's different. If you ever hear them, I've heard them speak before, it sounds like a totally different language. I don't understand most of what they're saying. So I'm sure he has a very interesting experience being there. I'm not sure where I'll end up, but I'm excited to go anywhere in Korea. I spent most of my time in Seoul, but I also visited Busan, which is a city in the south, and I visited Daegu, which is a city around the center of Korea. So I'm excited to go anywhere. One of the reasons I applied for sure is that as soon as I left Korea, I really wanted to come back. I have family there. I have many friends there now that I would like to see again. One of my friends that I made in Korea actually came and visited me in the United States. He spent a couple weeks in my home, and I spent some weeks at his home during Korean Thanksgiving called Chuseok. So I would like to see those people again. I would like to continue my language training especially. I started off before I went to Korea not knowing pretty much any Korean except for hello, goodbye, and thank you. But by the end of my first year there and upon my return to the United States to practice more Korean and learn more Korean, I'm now a fourth year language student and doing independent study right now. So I've come a long way, and that wouldn't have been possible without a lot of help from my professors and from many friends who practice Korean with me here and in Korea especially. So I'm really glad that I was recommended to apply for this. I'm really thankful for this opportunity and looking forward to hearing where I'll be going exactly in Korea. Okay. Actually, I just have a couple more things to say. So just in terms of my plans, I'm planning on doing a youth chorus, just like what Alex was talking about before with the secondary project. And I'm planning on doing the foreign service. Those are my future plans. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Our next speaker will be Michael Parisi Mercado, who is a third-year Doctor of Pharmacy and Master of Public Health student at the university. He completed his undergraduate education in Guayama, Puerto Rico, where he calls home. He aspires to work with underserved populations in the field of infectious diseases. Michael is bilingual in English and Spanish. He enjoys cooking, listening to music, taking pictures, and exploring new places. He will travel to Romania to conduct research that involves working with pharmacists to help improve the health and care of patients living with HIV/AIDS. And I just want to say that Michael is our third student in a row to be awarded to go to Romania for a study research grant.
All right, thank you very much, Karen, and thank you all for coming in today. It's a very nice day outside. So yes, I'm Michael Parisi. I'm from Guayama, Puerto Rico, and I'm a third-year pharmacy and public health student here at the University of Iowa. So there's a very small map of Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is a small map. I just wanted to show you where I'm from. So you see that red dot over there? It's kind of like south. That's where I lived most of my time in Puerto Rico. I also did my undergraduate studies in the Inter-American University of Puerto Rico, biology and chemistry. And then after a summer research internship here in Iowa, I decided to come back and pursue my pharmacy and public health education. So that's kind of like giving you a visual representation of quite of traveling I had to do to come to Iowa. So as far as my assignment, I got a research award in public health to go to Romania for the next academic year. Specifically, I'll be in Cluj-Napoca, which is the second largest city of Romania, and it's located in the Transylvania region. So prior to applying for a Fulbright and going to Romania, I had been to Romania through a Minority Health and Health Disparities International Research Training Program, or MHERD, or MERD for short. And I had the opportunity to go there for 10 weeks, did a little bit of research, and got to get to know a little bit the country. That first picture to your left is called, up there, they call that Sedatuye. And it just gives you a bit of beautiful view, and then there's me showing that I was there. And there is, that's a picture where I was staying. It's like a student dorm for athletes. I'm very close to the Cluj School of Public Health, which is where I will be working at during my Fulbright year. And the second picture, top right, is where I was working over there, which was at the University of Medicine and Pharmacy, but where I took the picture from was the faculty pharmacy building. Then that group there was the group that went with me. We went out together during that time, either for MHERD or for pharmacy rotations. Because Romania also offers pharmacy rotations for students. So a little bit of what I did over there, I got to explore what pharmacy is over there. So I was able to work in a community pharmacy. I was able to go to a rehabilitation hospital and look at antibiotic consumption, which is my main area of interest. And I went to a national conference of clinical pharmacy, and that was in the capital, Bucharest. And that particular experience was what really inspired me to pursue a Fulbright, because they talked a lot about the different challenges pharmacists face over in Romania, and they're not any different from what pharmacists here in the United States face. So what I wanted to look at was in what ways we can help pharmacists over there and pharmacy students to better prepare them to care for patients living with HIV/AIDS. As part of my research, I was working at the Cluj School of Public Health. I was looking mostly at an antimicrobial stewardship program, which is to improve the use of antibiotics, and was partly, half of the time I was at the Cochabamba School of Public Health, and the other part of the time I was at the University of Medicine and Pharmacy. And I also got to just spend a little bit of time at the Drug Information Research Center, where they mostly work with pharmacovigilance, and I'll go into that term in just a little bit. And the other big part of my experience while I was in Romania was the cultural, personal, and professional. So it was my first time ever being abroad, so that was kind of like a little shocking. I was very excited to be in a new place and just being with like different, like just experiencing a different culture. I was able to like travel to different places as well while I was over there, and just all the relationships I had the opportunity to build. So my proposed project is called The Analysis of Health Beliefs and Practices Related to HIV/AIDS. And what we're going to be looking at is mostly pharmacovigilance, which is just looking at drug safety, because it gets very complicated in patients living with HIV/AIDS. So some of my methodology is to conduct semi-structured interviews to pharmacy students or medical students, and we can try to incorporate pharmacists as well, just to get an understanding of what they know about HIV/AIDS. And that could be how it's transmitted, what drugs do you use, what do you know in general terms about HIV/AIDS. Then after that, based on what I collect from there, we'll develop themes and administer surveys, hopefully at a national level, to like all the pharmacy students across the country. And after that, we'll try to build culturally relevant educational materials to help them better care for patients living with HIV/AIDS. And as far as my community engagement, while I was there, a lot of students were really interested that I spoke Spanish, so they wanted to learn a little bit. And they also identify as Latino, so I thought it was a really good idea to assist in teaching Spanish to an organization over there. And I'll also be helping with teaching in the Cluj School of Public Health. As far as my future plans, I'll come back to Iowa, I'll finish my pharmacy degree. And after that, I hope to pursue more pharmacy practice training, because my main area would be infectious diseases, so I hope to become an expert in that area. After that, I plan to pursue graduate education to do health services research to further understand infectious diseases in underserved populations. Thanks.
Thank you, Michael. And Michael is our second student from the College of Pharmacy to receive a Fulbright Award in 3 years. So it's very exciting to see those young pharmacists go on and take on the role of an international pharmacist, which has been changing quite a bit in recent years, as I understand. Some of you may have heard of the Iowa Writers' Workshop. And our fourth presenter is Alexa Frank, who is an MFA candidate in creative writing in fiction at the Iowa Writers' Workshop. She'll be graduating in a couple of weeks. Alexa grew up in the suburbs of New York City and attended Bard College as an undergraduate. She is the current fiction editor of the Iowa Review, and she's a creative writing instructor here at the university. In her free time, she catches up on reading, TV, and sleep. Alexa will be going to Tokyo, Japan, to research canonical and contemporary depictions of mental illness in Japanese literature to support a novel of hers that is currently in progress. I'd like to welcome Alexa.
Thank you to the Iowa City Foreign Rights Council for having me today. I'm very excited to speak to you about my project and my work. So to reintroduce myself, my name is Alexa Frank. I grew up in Irvington, New York, which is in the lower Hudson Valley of New York, the kind of immediate suburbs right outside of the city. I made the big move to the upper Hudson Valley for my undergraduate education. I went to school at Bard College, which is a bit of, I would say it's a east coastal, funkier Grinnell. I studied Asian studies and film in college, which ended up being very formative for my Fulbright project, actually, because while I was there, I had the opportunity to take creative writing courses and Japanese translation courses as well, which I'll be pursuing during my time in Japan. So after college, I graduated in 2015, and I was working in nonprofit in New York City, and I received an email from a Bard creative writing professor that I had who was also a workshop graduate, and he encouraged me to apply to the Iowa Writers' Workshop just kind of out of the blue. It was 2 days before the deadline. So I told him very politely that this was impossible for me to do this year, but I sat on it and I did some light research. I say light because I think in retrospect I could have done more into MFAs. I was interested in going to graduate school, but I had no idea what to pursue, but I had always liked writing. I grew up in a house full of books. I had always written to kind of entertain myself, so I thought, why not an MFA? So I guess next March 2017, I got a very kind phone call from Sam Chang saying I had gotten in for fiction, and I made the biggest move thus far to Iowa City in August of 2017, and I have had an unforgettable experience at the workshop. It has changed my life in so many ways, and so much for the better. Being there, it's such a kind, generous space. I feel really grateful and honored to kind of write within that space, and also write among writers who really care about not only their work, but championing the work of others. So I'm graduating in May, like Karen said, but I will miss Iowa greatly. Not so much the polar vortexes, but I will miss the city, and I have only fond memories from here on out. So a little bit about my project. So my proposal, because I am going on an arts grant, I will be there working primarily on my novel, but I am also under the auspice of a study research grant. So for my novel, I will be conducting research about the evolution of the mental illness narrative in Japanese literature. Mental illness is something that I am very interested in academically and also on a personal level. And I'm interested in how literature can destigmatize a often kind of difficult, scary subject. So Japanese literature has a very rich tradition of kind of talking around mental illness. I would say this goes as far back as The Tale of Genji by Murasaki Shikibu, which was not only just the first Japanese novel, but probably the first Japanese novel with a documented interest in psychological realism. So in that novel, it approaches illness in a way that's very indicative of mental illness attitudes in, I guess, pre-modern Japan, in which illness is often attributed to spirits, and madness kind of is called a kakubyo, kind of this illness of confinement. And there wasn't really the scientific interest or the scientific component into understanding how mental illness functions as a disease, because it wasn't really considered a disease in the way it is now. But obviously attitudes change over time. The picture I have here is of a novel called No Longer Human by Osamu Dazai, which is one of Japan's most famous and kind of reputed authors. No Longer Human is a book taught in Japanese high schools all over the country, much like The Great Gatsby. However, unlike The Great Gatsby, it's not quite as jazz age fun. It's a bit of a dark novel about a very troubled man living in 1920s Japan. And it's also an autobiographical novel. Dazai, while he was writing this, was suffering from PTSD. And it's basically a novel about a man's struggle with mental illness, his various suicide attempts, his unhappiness, his the hypocrisy of bourgeoisie Japanese society, his lack of interest in his education, and yet also this kind of forced jocularity that he has been imposed into by society. And obviously No Longer Human was a novel that really changed Japanese literature. It kind of pressed for more interiority in Japanese lit, which I think is kind of one of the, common aesthetic values of Japanese literature, this look inward. So, and also mental illness continues to be kind of talked about in contemporary Japanese literature. So while I'm there, I am going to be studying, tracing, I guess, the evolution of mental illness from the pre-modern to the modern age, but with a particular focus in post-war contemporary mental illness narratives, probably written by women, because I'm interested also in the way that women who have been dealing with mental illness attitudes are not as lionized as Osamu Dazai or someone like Yukio Mishima, who famously committed ritual suicide in front of a government building. They're not as read in Japan, or they are. I mean, Japanese women are very much kind of on the front lines of literature right now, but when they talk about these issues, the response is different. So I'm interested in kind of unpacking that attitude as well. My novel is about many things, as a lot of writers often have trouble talking about their work. I am among them. But I will say my novel is about the internet. It's about people who are dealing with mental illness, who kind of live and exist on the internet in one form, and then on the other, outside in the real world, they're different people. So I'm interested partly in the way that internet mediates mental illness, how it can destigmatize and also stigmatize certain aspects of mental illness, and the ways that by talking about it, and even if it's in this sort of alias anonymous form, how it can be ultimately helpful and hopefully hopeful to the people who engage in this practice. So my next slide. So why Japan? I have a little picture here from manga to Murakami. So for total transparency, I am 25 years old. I'm a quarter of a century old right now. And I grew up around in the early 2000s, which in my mind was sort of the apex of the Japanese pop cultural boom. I am definitely a child of the Pokemon age. I grew up with Nintendo on TV. There were tons and tons of anime series. Everyone was very into Japan, J-pop. There is a Japanese wave going on. My novel intersects with that a little bit. It takes place in a world that's much like ours, but a little bit different, where in this version of 2019, we're going through a second Japanese pop cultural wave, but the iteration is a bit darker and more sinister than it was in the early 2000s. So why Japan? I guess, being serendipitously, growing up during that era, it was just all around. I thought Japan was the coolest place in the world. I had never stepped foot in the country, but no one could convince me otherwise. Manga was definitely a formative product, a formative cultural thing in my life at that age. It still continues to be. But something I liked about manga was just the breadth of storytelling, just the imagination. I'm also a big, champion of graphic novels as a legitimate art form. I think everyone, there's so many cultures around the world that kind of treat graphic novels and comics as legitimate literature. There's more literacy initiatives that are kind of based around how to interpret that kind of work. And I'm someone who believes in that a lot, because I would not be writing if it weren't for comic books. But then as I grew older, I was also interested in investigating Japan for traditional Japanese literature. And I would say Haruki Murakami was definitely one of my biggest influences. I like that he sort of wrote about whatever he wanted, and he could end books without an ending. I thought, to me as a 16-year-old, I thought, wow, who else is doing that? There are a lot of authors who do that, but at that age, I didn't really know better. But I would say Murakami was also my passageway into Japanese lit as a whole. And it's something that I, as in an academic and personal context, still really care about and would like to continue to study. I also studied Japanese for 12 years. I started studying when I was 2007. I would go to Harlem every week and study with my Japanese teacher, Yoko. She was also a music teacher. So on top of the kind of traditional Japanese language education, I learned many Japanese pop songs of the 70s and 80s. I won't sing any of them today, but I do know them. She would play the piano, and we would learn the language just through song. I'm not a great singer, but it was really instructive for me, and Yoko was a big influence in my life, as well as my best friend growing up, who is half Japanese. She gave me a magazine meant for second graders when we were elementary school, all written in Japanese. I could only look at the pictures, and I told myself in elementary school I would read this magazine from front to back one day. I'm very happy to tell you today that I can read that magazine from front to back, and I know what every single word in the magazine means. So dreams do come true. My next slide. So another component of my research, I'm interested in kind of, again, the stigma of mental illness in Japanese literature, but I'm also interested in the stigma of mental illness in America as well. And my research is partly comparative because my novel is set for the most part in America. It just deals with an American society inundated by Japanese culture. But I think in Japan, so they have this kind of a cultural conduct attitude called hone and tatemae. So I didn't include the Chinese characters that make up these words in my PowerPoint, but literally on the line level, hone is made up of the words for true and for sound, and tatemae is made up for the words for building and front. So you can think of it as sort of the true sound and facade. So in Japanese society and everyday life, you will have these hone, these true feelings that are, you cannot really express because they're almost too honest. That's kind of just the problem of it. Your honest feelings are meant to be contained, and to move about in society and through the world, you have to put up a front called tatemae, which is to say the appropriate things at the appropriate times. And these hone are kind of just built up in you, and they're just, I guess in English, the comparison would be your private mind and your public mind. So in America, we have this as well. What I think is kind of interesting and maybe problematic about this attitude is that, in literature, it becomes this amazing space to kind of think about, mental illness among other difficult subjects with just your hone. There's no tatemae. Literature becomes not a facade, but I guess a kind of a diary and a mode of telling the truth. But what I find problematic and also interesting is that, there's an acceptance that literature can be a platform to getting at the truth, but this does not always dovetail into real life. That's, a difficult subject to conquer in 1 year, let alone, someone's lifetime, but it's something I'm interested in kind of researching while I'm there. So I did go to Tokyo last year under the auspice of a graduate travel research award from the Center of Asian Pacific Studies here at Iowa and Japan Foundation. I went to do some preliminary research for my Fulbright interest, my Fulbright proposal, and I also researched alternative manga magazines and the women who wrote in these magazines and were not acknowledged in any way until usually after their death. Okay. Sorry, winding it up here. So I went to Tokyo and had a great time. I will be going to Waseda University in Tokyo, Japan. It is the alma mater of Haruki Murakami, funny enough. It's known for having great literature and creative writing programs. MFAs are not really a thing in most countries. Japan is one of them. But I will be studying among some really amazing authors and translators and doing my work there, living in Tokyo with the great weather. It gets unbearably hot in the summer, but no polar vortexes. After my Fulbright, I would love to return to America and publish my novel and, maybe do some creative writing teaching and talking to you guys again, hopefully about what it meant. Thank you so much.
For Jeffrey, what does your mom think about your recent interest in Korea?
My mom, how do I say this? My mom, she is very excited about it. She doesn't show it in the way that other moms might show it. She's kind of like, I think she has the quality of Korean mothers where, I don't know how to say that. She's excited about it. She's excited about it. Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks.
And another parent question. Alex, have you convinced your parents and relatives that Colombia is safe?
So actually, my mother has never left the country. She's 71 years old, lives in rural Iowa, and she promised me she would visit me during my year in Colombia because the alternative would have been a board scholarship to United Arab Emirates, and that frightened her more than being in Colombia did. And she also said that she would be able to handle the plane ride to Colombia and wouldn't be able to do a transatlantic flight. So she's convinced. And then my older sister still sends me articles of people getting stabbed on the street in Colombia. Which I say, and doesn't that happen in Lancaster too, which is where she lives? So they'll get there. Hopefully once I bring them to visit me, it'll fully sink in.
And this is for Alexa. The internet and mental illness. Say more about what hope you have for the role of the internet in relationship to mental illness, if you would.
That's a challenging question because the internet moves really fast. But on a personal level, I think it's not so much the internet's duty to destigmatize mental illness, but I guess our duties offline to make mental illness safe to talk about and be transparent about in the real world. And then I think the internet will follow suit in becoming a more, welcoming space for destigmatized conversations, though I do think the internet has the advantage of being an anonymous platform in which we can talk freely about things. The only problem is, why do we need the anonymity to do that? That's something that I would like to unpack with my work. But yeah, thanks.
And Michael, we have to give you a question too, which is, are the attitudes in Romania about HIV/AIDS similar to what we have seen in the United States, where it was something you didn't talk about and it was embarrassment, to being much more open now? Or what did you find in the attitudes towards people with HIV and AIDS in Romania?
So there really isn't much published about a lot of research on HIV/AIDS in Romania, but it is still a very stigmatized topic. A lot of people are not open to talk about like their HIV status. They're not open to talk about sexual behaviors or anything like that. There's this one study that did talk about just like how it's transmitted and things like that. So there really isn't. They're not very open. That's something we're hoping to address.
Okay, well now, unfortunately, we have to conclude our program. I think we would all like to have heard more from all of them. But I want to give a big thank you to Jeffrey Clark, Alex Baer, Alexa Frank, and Michael Parisi Mercado for their presentations. Excellent. I also want to thank our sponsors, the University of Iowa's International Programs, the University of Iowa's Honors Program, the University of Iowa Public Policy Center, and the Stanley U of I Foundation Support Organization for their generous support. And we also thank today's special sponsors, Midwest One Bank, Ellen Swanson, Bank & McCune Realtors, and Alex and Ken Atkinson. And we also thank City Channel 4 for making our programs available for viewing and getting the AV work to work. Thank you very much. And now, Jeffrey, Alex, and Alexa, and Michael, if you would come forward, we have our small token of our appreciation with the very highly coveted Iowa City Foreign Relations Council mug, one for each of you, that you can take with you to Tokyo or Colombia or Romania or Japan. What am I forgetting? Korea with you, and think about us too. Okay, thank you.